Yeah, I fully agree that you need to train different systems. And I think more we understand about biochemistry, we know that more there are different pathways. Like, for example, some needs that the glycogen stores are depleted, some come from the mechanical loading of the muscle stretching. So there's so many different things, and you cannot simplify it too much. It's always so many different things. Do you think it's usually we don't understand all the pathways? Do you think it's kind of in a strength training, for example, kind of mix different sets that you would stimulate all the pathways for hopefully stimulating as much different systems as you need?
Yeah, I think that just by playing football, just by doing normal drills on the pitch, playing 11 versus 11 or 4v4 and so on, you are always stimulating all systems. You are always because of being a hybrid sport, and this is also what we see when we look at the health outcome of football. If we take normally untrained people and we let them play football for a period of time, we see that they improve in many ways. They improve their lean body mass, so they gain muscle, they lose fat, they get better at utilizing glycogen as a substrate, they get better at burning fat, they train their anaerobic energy systems, they get better balance, better strength, and so on. So and this is the same by being on the pitch and playing, you always stimulate all systems. But when you already are well trained, like the elite players are, strength training and high intensity training on the pitch are like training is a type of training that stimulates pathways that improve multiple qualities in the muscles. So if we read like training physiology books for practitioners that were written decades ago or 10 years ago, maybe the message would be that if you want to improve your high intensity exercise capacity, you need to do anaerobic training, and if you need to improve your endurance, you need to do endurance training. So, but things are much more complex when we start to think in physiological systems, and if you can like maintain your endurance by playing football, then the high intense actions or individual training performed on the pitch as high intensity drills is what can improve you further. Not only your explosiveness or your anaerobic abilities, but also your endurance capacity. And recently, several groups, research groups, especially in Denmark, but also in Canada, have done studies showing that even in endurance sports, like long distance runners, if you reduce their training volume markedly, but you increase the intensity, they improve not only their anaerobic abilities, but they also improve their endurance capacity. So this is back to that high intensity training, high intensity aerobic training and anaerobic training may be the best type of training to improve your ability if you already have a solid aerobic base.
Could you give us examples of high intensity training? Would you put them a little bit for every day, or would you have like just certain days, a little bit more? How would you program it in the training program?
Yeah, I could make some examples that if you play on Sunday and you are one of the players that play the entire game, you don't do any high intensity training except the strength training on the Monday, on the first day. But then you have the Wednesday and the Thursday, and even the Friday, if it's a 1 week or 1 game week, where you can do high intensity training. And when we say high intensity interval training, we have different categories. We have what we call aerobic high intensity training, which is normally intervals where you work for 1 minute or 4 minutes, and you recover maybe for 30 seconds up to 3 minutes, depending on the interval range, but you don't go above 3-4 minutes in the intervals. And then we have the anaerobic intervals, which normally is sequences where you have 15 to 30 seconds of really, really all out intensity. So then I would use for that player or those players that played on the Sunday, I would use these training categories as part of the training on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday.
Mm.
If you have players that didn't play, you would obviously do this on Monday and maybe Tuesday as well.
Mm. So basically aerobic high intensity and anaerobic high intensity. Do you see a role for plyometrics or kind of single explosive actions, for example, jumps?
Yes, like when we it's a little like it depends on the terminology that you're using, but we usually separate it into the power training. We call it power because instead of using strength, it's power is much more precise in relation to the requirements of football. But we call it that you have to train your basic power. And this is what you do in the gym when using weights or using external load. But then we all have what we call transference power. And these are like plyometrics and jumps and accelerations, change of direction. You can also do it in the gym, but you can also do it elsewhere. Mm. And this is like a type of training where you try to use the strength that you have gained from your basic strength training into movements without any external loads, but where you use, but that are specific for football. And then we have the next step, which is football power. This is where you are on the pitch with your boots on and you such as agility training, jump training and speed training, where you train those abilities on the pitch. So this is how we differentiate between different areas of power. So this is clearly something that should be done every week. And then it's up to you to juggle between basic power and transference power and football power, depending on the level of your team, the league that you're playing in. Maybe some of the players, they do more basic power, some of them are doing less basic power. So it's also, again, in relation to your role in the team.
Mm. And how would you say, you probably know quite a bit how teams are training. Do you see different cultures in the teams that are kind of modern in their training? They understand these principles, but they would do quite differently because there's so many ways to do training.
Yeah. And it's not like what I'm saying now. It's one model. This is not the truth as such, because you can be very successful and you can do fitness training in a successful manner in many ways in football. But it depends very much on the culture. In some regions, it's more. If you go to Eastern Europe, it's maybe still very normal to run without a ball, for example. Maybe also in Germany still. And if you go to other regions, it may be a better culture or a stronger culture for gym training. So it's very dependent on where you are. But today, if you go to the big leagues, I think it's not a matter of culture if you are in England or in Spain, because it's a mix of the coaches are coming from all over the world. So in those teams, I think it's more driven by science than it has ever been before. Then it's more driven by science than culture at the highest level.
Yeah, and you said that you have quite many times already differing training for different role and for the tactics of the team. Do you see like individualized training based on the athlete's inherent capabilities, like for example, muscle type, fiber composition? Other sports, like for example, endurance sports, have noticed that it's quite a different training. Some use, for example, block training that they do 5 days, for example, in a row, very intensive, and then they recover for a month, and it fits some people, and for some it's disastrous. So do you have this kind of things yet that you would kind of individualize for inherent.
Yeah, again, I think it's very important to remember that football is so complex, and now we're speaking primarily about the physiological side of it, but you always need to approach football from an integrated approach. So you always need to because everything is a matter of choice. So if you choose to do something that has main emphasis on the physiological side of it, are you then compromising something technically and tactically? And the same if you're doing a tactical session, but with very little physiological stimulus, are you then compromising the physiological side of it? And this is why it's so important to be aware of the individual and the specific demands of this game. In relation to those examples that you are mentioning from primarily from track and field sports with fiber types and so on, if you want to investigate that, you need to take muscle biopsies, and normally you don't do that just to determine the fiber type, but you are aware of when you are a coach and you're working with a team, you know that okay, this guy or this woman is primarily an endurance has primarily an endurance profile, and those players that are really explosive, you see this is a player that has great skills within explosiveness and speed, and I think that you have to be aware of that maybe those outliers that you have. Those players that have the endurance profile, they can tolerate much more training and a much higher training load. And sometimes you need to be careful with those really explosive players they cannot always train with the same load. So you need to spare them sometimes and to control what they are doing and have other options for those. Yeah. I would not like try to detrain in relation to fiber types like you're doing in individual sports, because then you are compromising some of the football part of it. So you can never do optimal fitness training in football. You always need to look at it from an holistic point of view.
Yeah, I can easily see that. So it's quite complex doing the strength and conditioning training with all the other training. How would you simplify the message to coaches? You know a little bit how the culture is. There's some points to improve. How would you simplify the message to coaches?
Yeah. Simplify it. It's like it depends very much on your practical scenario. So if you have 10 coaches in your squad and 3 fields side by side every time you train, then it's quite easy to do individual training and to be very specific individually wise. But if you are in a smaller setting where you don't have these opportunities, you need to be creative. I would say that it is a challenge to communicate many of these things to the coaching environment, but with data, if you have data analysis and you can show coaches how extreme the differences between players can be, and at the same time that you can show them with clips, what we have used many times from a learning point of view or pedagogical point of view, is to combine the data that we get from match analysis with video clips. And I think that's a very good way to communicate with coaches, because many coaches, most coaches, what they understand very well is what they see game wise and football wise. So I think that's the way to communicate. So try to communicate in the same language that is being used in the football environment.
And would you say that individualizing the training for the role and the tactic is the easiest thing to improve in the training?
I would not say that it's the easiest, but it's one of the most important things, because if you are always training your team as a group, and if you don't focus or emphasize or prioritize the most important things for the individual player, what you don't train, you don't improve on. That's how easy it is. So I think that as a coach, you need to think, why is this player part of my team? What is he or she good at? What are their primary competences, and what are they lacking to be better at fulfilling that role that I have intended them to do? And then I need to do, okay, how can I train that? And sometimes you can do that in a group setting for some areas, but some of these issues you have to train on an individual basis. You have to break the game down to small sequences and try to replicate those, and to do those as close to the game as possible. And I think I like that way of working. I think it's you are able to be creative. You are able to make new drills for the players, to surprise the players, and from a player's point of view, the players, they are also key component in this process, because they are actually playing the role in the team, and they are also reflecting on this, because they know what they are good at, and they also know what they could be better at in relation to their primary role in the team. So one important step in this is to communicate with the players, and to take the players on board in relation to decision making. So I think that this is the way to do it, to also discuss the drills with the players, and not only be at the top and dictate what people should do, but to take the players on board, especially if you are at the elite levels. The players have a lot to contribute with.
And so basically different roles need different types of physiologies, different type of training. Could you give some examples of different position, and what do you think is the maybe closest to the ideal physiology of the current players?
Yeah, I would say that we know that there are huge positional differences. So we know that if you are a central midfielders, or the average central midfielder, your endurance capacity do not necessarily need to be at the same level as if you are an attacker, or if you are a wing midfielder, or you are one of the central midfielders, or fullback for that sense. So this is like I would say that looking ahead, the central midfielders is the position that is the only position in the team in general that is not utilizing their entire physical capacity in a game, and also the goalkeeper. So there are some perspective for the future to how can you use those positions better in order to use their physical capacity better. And if you are playing the general fullback, or the general wide midfielder, you usually need to have like a mixed profile. You need to be fast, you need to be very strong anaerobically, but you also need to have a high aerobic capacity. In relation to the central midfielders, it depends a lot on how you play, because you can play with a holding midfielder that is very stationary, that does not move that much, and you can play with a more attacking midfielder. And if you have the attacking midfielders, those positions are normally one of the most demanding in the team. So you also need to have a physiological profile primarily close to what I described before for the fullbacks and central midfielders. In relation to attackers, we see quite a huge variability between attacking types and how you play tactically. So we see attackers with the same profile as the central midfielders, no, as the central defenders, and we see attackers with more midfield type of physiology. So this is maybe the generic picture, but when we look within the different positions, we see huge individual differences. So it's, which again adds to the complexity that you cannot just say that this is training for midfielders or central midfielders or attackers. It needs to be put into that specific player's context, and it also needs to put into the perspective of the team, what the coach actually wants to develop.
So if we talk about Usain Bolt, that he wanted to get to professional football, and he at least had the sprinting speed and the acceleration, what were your thoughts when he was trying? What did you think how it will go before seeing how it went?
I think it was quite fun and interesting from a media point of view. But with his profile, I would say that there would have been two options, either to play attack or central midfield.
Yeah. So
otherwise, I think it was a fun and interesting event.
Yeah. Do you think if he would have the skills, the motor skills, he would have actually been practicing 20 years with the ball and be skillful? Do you think his physiology would have fit, or he could have trained quite fast
definitely.
to fit the game?
Yeah, and we see several types of players that have that profile that could maybe also have been sprinters.
Yeah.
So we see several types in all the big leagues that have that profile. So I'm quite confident that he's an athlete, and the good thing about football is that that most types of athletes can be football players. You can, depending on your fiber types or your stature, we see players in all sizes and all types. So and that obviously also goes for Usain Bolt. He obviously could also have been a football player at a high level, yes, if he trained from childhood.
Yeah. And who would you say are the sprinter style players currently?
Yeah, so you see Lukaku, for example, is a good example of that type of player. Ronaldo is also that type of player, or at least used to be. But
yeah. So very, very interesting things. And you have also done some really nice studies related to fatigue and glycogen depletion. Could you tell a little bit about those studies and findings?
Yeah, as we have if I could go back in time, then in the 1960s, some Swedes developed the muscle biopsy technique, is where you can, with a biopsy needle, go into the muscle and take a piece of muscle out and analyze it for different substances, and among these glycogen. This is a technique that we have used several times, and we're one of the few groups in the world that are actually taking muscle biopsies during football games. And we've done a number of studies where we have taken biopsies, taking players out of the game, early in the game, middle of the game, in relation to intense periods, and at the end of the game, and also after the game, to look at the recovery. And one of the focuses in this has been on the muscle glycogen, or the muscle sugar that you have stored in your muscles. And we see that football is a type of activity that is very glycogen consuming. You break down your glycogen quite fast and at a high rate, and you break down glycogen in both the endurance and the fast muscle fiber types. And we have also looked at different sites in the muscle that you also break down glycogen pools that are in different areas in the muscle cell. And one of the very interesting things about muscle glycogen in football, or the muscle glycogen usage in football compared to other sport, is that after the game, if you are in the Tour de France and you empty all your glycogen stores during one day of cycling, then after 24 hours you can get back to normal. This is not possible in football, and we believe that it's related to the eccentric work that you do a lot of changes of direction, and you get small injuries in your muscle cell, and some of the physiological or responses to that may hamper or reduce or impair your ability to refill your muscle glycogen stores. So that may be one of the causes of fatigue in the second half of a football game. That because we know that muscle glycogen, it affects several important mechanisms in the muscle cell that are needed in order to produce force. And the long recovery that we see in football, one of the reasons that you can't play every day like you do in, for example, in team handball, you normally play much more, or you have a much frequent or shorter time between games. This is one of the reasons that you can't do that. It's because of the physiological loading of football.
And I saw also that you have done like specifically looking at different fiber types and the depletion in those. Could you tell more about how is it depleted in a game?
Yeah, we see that when you start a game and you are well prepared, we see that both the slow twitch fiber types and the fast twitch fiber types are full of glycogen. And then we see at the end of the game, both fiber types are emptied of glycogen or nearly emptied. So both fiber types are low on glycogen and are low to a degree where we know that it will affect performance. This is one of the main causes or indirect causes of fatigue in football, and this is something that we're quite investigating further right now.
And do you think you could, for example, use this information somehow that you said that the game is depleting both, but could you, like, for example, probably after strength training, the fast muscle fibers are depleted, and then you still have the slower muscle fibers are probably performing well. So can you kind of use it for your advantage?
Yeah, you if it was like that in football, that for example you only used one of the fiber types, then you could do a different type of training the day after. But the reason or the effect of that both fiber types are being utilized, it tells us that the need of recovery is quite high. But we can use this type of information to prioritize proper nutritional strategies, but also maybe to plan the training. How do you train the last day before the game? For example, you need to avoid an anaerobic training, or you need to avoid training that is glycogen consuming. And another like thing that you can use this type of information is if you do strength training, you can basically reduce the degree of muscle injury, and that may promote a refilling of the glycogen stores. So these are just examples of how you can translate those findings into practice.
So basically strengthen your tendons and your aponeurosis for the eccentric demands of the game with basically eccentric training in the gym.
Yes, strengthening the ability of the muscle fibers to tolerate that type of stress that you experience during a game.
Yeah, really interesting points. Do you have something you would like to add in the discussion?
No, not necessarily. I think it's a pleasure to be given the opportunity to discuss these types of things. I've been involved with football most periods of my life, and been working as a football researcher for 25 years. So it's always a privilege to be able to talk and discuss.
Yeah, this was really nice discussion. Maybe as a last question, I think there's probably quite many people interested doing research with you or collaborating. Is there any type of persons you are looking, or do you have any positions open?
We are always the group that I'm working with in relation to football research, primarily at the University of Southern Denmark. This is the world leading group within football research, and we are always looking for collaborators. And the type of work that we do with football is quite broad scale. So we're looking at cognition in football, strength training in football, nutrition in football, talent identification, women's football. So we are basically covering most aspects. So basically anybody that is interested is always welcome to drop us a mail, an email, or to be interested. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks. This was really fascinating discussion for the coaching science.
Thank you so much.